For that first day, watch this video. I have no idea if any of you did watch that video. How many of you did? Just out of curiosity. Oh, cool. That makes it even easier now. Because that video went over the material we would be going over for today, okay? Which is writing, reading about fiction, plot, character setting, all that kind of stuff. But since you've watched that and read this material both for then and hopefully for today, what that means we can do is we can not talk about all that and instead go straight to, this will get us a little bit back on track, to the short story by Nathaniel Hawthorne. We're only doing 3 short stories in here for the simple reason that if any of you are readers at all, you're probably going to read a novel, okay? And the reason I spend so short time on fiction and a lot of time on plays and poetry is because you're not likely to read plays or poetry on your own, especially poetry, though you hear it probably every day, because I see many of you walk in with your earbuds in, and you're not listening to podcasts, I know. You're not listening to NPR or some other talk show. You've got music going, and the music is usually, not always, but usually, accompanied by words. And when you have music accompanied by words, you've got poetry. Whether you're aware it is poetry or not. Now, some of it, in my opinion, is bad poetry, but we won't talk about that. So, 3 short stories. We'll have another exam after these. That exam will be relatively both easy and short. So we start with Nathaniel Hawthorne. How many of you have read anything by Hawthorne before? Yeah, almost. Only one? What? Scarlet Letter? Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, most of you have that sentenced on you in high school.
Yeah, nobody chooses to read that.
Yeah, nobody chooses to read Scarlet Letter. Nobody chooses to read really anymore Hemingway's Of Mice and Men, but it is also inflicted on students in high school. You know, which really isn't one of the best works to assign to high school students who are already going through all kinds of issues. And then you have, you know, the murder of your best friend. It's just not a good idea. So, Hawthorne. What do you know about Hawthorne? When did he live, first of all? Roughly. Century. 19th century, okay? Lived and died 19th century, okay? He not only wrote a short story we were reading, Minister's Blackville. He wrote many short stories, but he also wrote a few novels, Scarlet Letter being one, House of the Seven Gables. If you're interested in ghost stories, House of the Seven Gables is a pretty good ghost story. He kind of gets into ghost stories about the same time as one of his contemporaries, Edgar Allan Poe. Right? And if you've never read any Poe, oh, you need to read. You need to read Poe. Especially around midnight, storming, power goes out, candlelight. Read The Fall of the House of Usher. You want to get scared witless. That's a good one. So, we're not reading one of those. We are reading, not Young Goodman Brown, The Minister's Black Veil. Page 389. It's written in 1836. I'm not going to talk anymore about Hawthorne's background. And notice we've got the title, and then we have like a subtitle, a parable. What's a parable? Who famously told a lot of parables? Jesus. So why did Jesus walk around telling parables?
Life lessons.
Okay, life lessons.
Stories with a bigger meaning.
Stories with a bigger meaning. If you're familiar with Jesus' parable telling, however, how often did the people around him understand the parables? They didn't. They didn't. See, a parable is not a story with a clear meaning. A parable is a story told where the meaning is only known to those who are, quote unquote, in the know. Which is why Jesus often prefaces or ends his parables with, "Those who have ears to hear, let them hear." If you're in Jesus' little clique, in other words, okay, you get to find out what the parable means. Because after he tells his parables, he's walking around, he's got huge crowds, he tells a parable, he breaks off and goes off with the disciples, and they say, "What did it mean?" And he says, "To you it is given to know." And so he expounds on the parable of the mustard seed, the parable of the sower, the parable of the talents, the parable of the rich man. He explains to the disciples. Notice, even the disciples don't get them. Okay? This is a parable. So what is Hawthorne telling us? Is the meaning clear? Not necessarily. Okay? So, when is it set? Keep in mind, setting is important. How different would A Midsummer Night's Dream be without the setting of the wood for part of it? Okay? So when is this set? Do we get an exact date? No, we don't. But we do get terms that are used. And the terms give us an indication of a general time frame. Okay? For example, we have on page 390, Goodman Gray, okay, speaking. Well, that term Goodman tells us this is set in Puritan New England. So when were the Puritans around? Not in the 1830s. Maybe a few. 17th century. Okay? Late 1600s, early 1700s. What are the Puritans today famous for? What did they do? We just went through a presidential nomination of a Supreme Court justice. That nomination process has been equated by many with something else that happened in colonial American history. Anybody know what?
Salem witch trials.
Salem witch trials. How do you prove somebody's a witch?
Drown them.
Do you drown them? No, you throw them in water and see if they float. Lindsey Graham had somebody badgering him as he's walking around in the Capitol, you know, don't you listen to women who are red, blah, 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 blah. And he turned around and said, maybe we should throw them in water. There's our link. Why? Because if you float, then you're innocent. But people don't generally float if they're thrown into water. They sink. Well, how long do they have to stay sunk for? Until they don't float.
I thought if it was a float, you were a witch, and if you drowned, you're innocent.
Yeah, sorry, got to mix it up. Sorry, lack of sleep. Yeah, if you float, you're witch. If you drown, you're innocent. Or if you sink, you're innocent. But you have to stay sunk. Because if you make yourself sink, which every one of us can do, after a while, we want to come up for air, right? You come up for air, and what does that indicate? You're a witch. Burn them. Okay? Hawthorne was related to them. I'm directly related to Hawthorne. My brother's family genealogy. Related to Hawthorne and Emerson and Thoreau and all those guys. Hawthorne was directly related to one of the judges in the Salem witch trials. He kind of had a complex about it. He felt guilty for something his ancestors over 100 years previously had done. Just like a lot of white Southerners, maybe not a lot, some white Southerners today, if they find out their family owned slaves, there's, kind of mental familial guilt there. So the Salem witch trials figure in a lot of what he writes about. Okay? Though this has nothing to do with witches. The sexton stood in the porch of Milford Meeting House, pulling lustily at the bell rope. He's pulling at the rope, announcing what? Church is getting ready to start. Get your behinds in here. This is at a time when everybody had to go to church. If you weren't at church, the local authorities would, question you. So people come walking around, and the sexton cries out, "What has good Parson Hooper got upon his face?" They turn and they look, and there's Mr. Hooper walking, notice, bottom of 389, pacing slowly his meditative way towards the meeting house. Pacing slowly his meditative way. His meditative way tells us what about how Parson Hooper walks? Slowly, deliberately. Meditative means what? Where's his mind? Yeah. He's thinking about something. By saying his meditative way, the narrator is telling us something about this guy's character. He's a thinker. Okay? They all look and they start. They're amazed. Goodman Gray. Are you sure it is our parson? Notice, have we told what is different about the parson? Not yet. Of a certainty it is good Mr. Hooper, says the sexton. He was to have exchanged pulpits with Parson Chute of Westbury, but he couldn't. And then we're told what is different. Mr. Hooper, a gentlemanly person of about 30, though still a bachelor, was dressed due clerical neatness, as if a careful wife had starched his band, brushed the weekly dust from his Sunday's garb. So he's got his little white collar. But this is what's different. Swathed about his forehead, hanging down over his face, so as to be shaken by his breath, Mr. Hooper had on a black veil. So imagine that this handkerchief was black. Right? Where is he wearing it? Here? Like a bandit? No, it's like this. Okay? So, I can pull this, and even if it were black, it'd work the same way. I could pull this up, and guess what? I can see all of you. But you can't see my face. On a nearer view, it seemed to consist of 2 folds of crepe, which entirely concealed his features, except the mouth and chin. So it's from forehead to just above his mouth. Probably did not intercept his sight farther than to give a darkened aspect to all living and inanimate things. Okay? So with this short story, because it's a parable, it's symbolic. Okay? So start to think of symbols. What can be symbols? Pretty much anything. Any kind of image can be a symbol. So what's included under any kind of image? Colors or shades. So we were told it gave a darkened aspect. So dark versus light. Where did we see that already? Oedipus the king, right? Oedipus's mental eyes are dark throughout the play until he puts out his physical eyes and then he sees. So, probably did not intercept his sight farther than to give a darkened aspect to all living and inanimate things. With this, look at the next word, gloomy. We think gloomy means sad. It doesn't. Gloomy means shadowed, in darkness. So when you are in a gloomy mood, that means a phrase we use for somebody who has fallen ill, under the weather. Well, we're all under the weather all the time because it's all around us. But under the weather means like you've got clouds following you. Gloomy aspect means he's walking around and it's always dark. All right? With this and then what's the next word? Shade. With this darkened darkness about him. Before him, good Mr. Hooper walked onward, slow, quiet pace, stooping somewhat, looking on the ground, as is customary with abstracted men. Again, his mind is elsewhere. Nods kindly to his parishioners. The sexton, I can't really feel as if good Mr. Hooper's face was behind that piece of crepe. Well, what the hell would be behind that crepe? If not his face, is he going to remove it and be like, in the one, take the red pill, blue pill, Matrix film, and have the face disappear? An old woman, I don't like it. He's changed himself into something awful. How? By hiding his face. What does awful mean there? Does it mean horrible? No. It means full of awe. We don't like to be full of awe generally. Why? Because it plays with our mind. We want things to be understandable. Okay? So, notice, by covering his face, she says, he's changed himself into something awful. Not understandable. Goodman Gray, our parson has gone mad. Has he? Or are all the people going mad? Simply because he has this. There is a study done. There's a psychology study done at a university. Oh, man. It's got to be about 25 or 30 years ago now. Where the professor did something like this. And it might have been one of the Ivy League schools. The professor came into class one day, paper bag over his head. And he did that every day for the semester. Just 2 eye holes, mouth holes, so they could understand him as he spoke. And the whole purpose of the study was to gauge students' reactions. And at first they thought it was funny, but by the end of the semester, they were severely weirded out, thinking, what is going on with this guy? Because if I remember correctly, he did it from the first day of class on. So, unless they had him previously, they had no idea what this guy looked like. Okay? Look at how the people react here. So, they go into church, people are looking around, and they're mumbling about him. And we're told, paragraph 10, page 390. General bustle, etc., etc. But Mr. Hooper appeared not to notice the perturbation of his people. He didn't notice how upset they were. He entered with an almost noiseless step, bent his head mildly. That is, he's acknowledging the people in the pews. Bowed as he passed his oldest parishioner, white-haired great-grandsire. Strange to observe how slowly this venerable man became conscious of something singular in the appearance of his pastor. He seemed not fully to partake of the prevailing wonder, till Mr. Hooper had ascended the stairs. That is, ascended the stairs up to the pulpit. Okay? And showed himself in the pulpit face to face with his congregation. So, pretty much what most of them have seen is him primarily from the side. And then he stands up, facing everybody, but notice we're told face to face, but it's not really face to face, is it? It's face to kerchief kind of a thing. That mysterious emblem was never once withdrawn. What's an emblem? Several of you have them on you right now. If nowhere else, probably on your shoes.
Symbol
Yeah,
or
because I've got that on my shoes. Okay? It's a symbol. An emblem is an image that tells a story, or an image that conveys an idea. Okay? Everybody knows this is the Nike swoosh. Well, who is Nike? Not what is Nike, who was Nike. There's a reason when Bill Bowerman and the others founded Nike back in the 1970s, why they named it Nike, Goddess of Victory. Because you could name it, I don't know what the Goddess of Losers is, but, Loser-y. And, nobody would buy those shoes. Right? So, the veil is now described as an emblem. So if it's an emblem, what is it emblematic of? What does it convey? Bear in mind the word that describes the emblem is mysterious. What's a mystery?
unknown.
Unknown. Can it be known? Can a mystery be solved? No. A mystery cannot be solved. A mystery is that which is unsolvable. Agatha Christie did not write mysteries. She wrote whodunits. John Grisham doesn't write mysteries. He writes whodunits. You figure out who done it by the end of the novel. A true mystery is something that cannot be resolved. In the Judeo-Christian Western tradition, the incarnation of Christ, how God, who is uncircumscribable, eternal, all that kind of stuff, could become an 18-inch long, 7-pound baby. Whoosh. Explain that. You can't. The resurrection, can't explain it. How does something that was dead become not dead? By its own. Can't explain it. Okay? Those are mysteries. They cannot be rationally, logically either understood or argued. Okay? So, he shook with his measured breath as he gave out the psalm, that is, as he read the psalm. It threw its... What does obscurity mean? If something is obscure, it's what? Unclear. It's unclear. It threw its obscurity between him and the holy page. That is, as he read the Bible, the veil's over his eyes. As he read the scriptures, and while he prayed, the veil, implication is he's looking up. He doesn't have his head bowed down like this. Did he seek to hide it from the dread being whom he was addressing? Notice the narrator is asking this. He has his face up to God, but his face is covered, so God can't see it? Question mark. Or is he trying to hide something? Such was the effect of this simple piece of crepe that more than one woman of delicate nerves was forced to leave the meeting house. She had to rush out because, Yet perhaps the pale-faced congregation. Now, why would the congregation be pale-faced? Frightened? So, we go on. He had a reputation of being a good preacher. Notice, good preacher. Not a great preacher, but not a bad preacher. Not an energetic one. That is, he's not like, I can't remember the Puritan preacher, guy who wrote Sinners in the Hands of an Angry God. Jonathan Edwards, thank you. He's not like Jonathan Edwards, who wants to scare people out of hell into heaven. Okay? He's not a fire and brimstone. He just kind of, you've probably had professors like this. I've never been charged of being like this because I vary my intonation and voice level and such. When I used to teach with doors open, people down the hall would close their doors because I was so loud. But you probably had professors who just kind of speak in a monotone all day long. I've walked by classes like that. I'd fall asleep walking by. Okay? But this time, there is something either in the sentiment, long paragraph beginning page 391, of the discourse itself or in the imagination of the auditors, which made it greatly the most powerful effort that they had ever heard from their pastor's lips. It was tinged, notice, more darkly than usual with the gentle gloom of his temperament. So, temperamentally, he's kind of a gloomy person, dark-minded, meditative, melancholic, depressed. What was he talking about? The subject had reference to secret sin and those sad mysteries which we hide from our nearest and dearest and would fain conceal from our own consciousness, even forgetting that the omniscient can detect them. In other words, our deepest, darkest secrets that we don't let anybody else know and that we pretend God doesn't even know. A subtle power was breathed into his words. Each member of the congregation, the most innocent girl, the man of hardened breast, felt as if he had crept upon them behind his awful veil and discovered their hoarded iniquity of deed or thought. Like he snuck up behind them and went, "Gotcha!" as they're having some, dirty thought or something. Nothing terrible in what he said, no violence, and yet the people quaked. The close of the services, notice, they can't wait to get out of there. Why?
So you're uncomfortable?
They're uncomfortable. He would not be a good modern American evangelical preacher where it's all about, making people happy and feel good and such. This is not your Starbucks mega church, okay? What else? They're uncomfortable. What else? Why else do they want to get out of there? Because he's there. They want to get away from him, okay? And conscious of lighter spirits the moment they lost sight of the black veil. As soon as that veil is out of their sight, they feel better. Right? The veil is obviously a symbol. Its color, blackness, is a symbol. So, they go home their ways. He talks to people, etc. In the bottom of 391, a lady says, "How strange that a simple black veil, such as any woman might wear on her bonnet, should become such a terrible thing on Mr. Hooper's face." Her husband, something must be surely amiss with Mr. Hooper's intellect. He's gone loco, is what he means. But the strangest part of the affair is the effect of this vagary, even on a sober-minded man like myself. In other words, I don't understand why somebody sober-minded like me is bothered by that. The black veil throws its influence over his whole person, makes him ghost-like. Don't you feel it so? She goes, "Truly I do. And I would not be alone with him for the world. I wonder he is not alone. I wonder he is not afraid to be alone with himself." Why would he be afraid to be alone with himself? Are any of you ever afraid to be by yourself? In your room, whatever? Her husband, men sometimes are so. He doesn't mean men only. People are sometimes afraid to be alone. What does it mean to be alone? It's both a physical thing, but there's more to it, right? It's a mental thing or a spiritual thing. To be alienated, to be isolated from others. Throughout the 20th century, an idea that was thought to be rampant was this notion of alienation. That we are each of us, and you're going to see this in a story we'll do later. Each of us kind of inhabits a little box, and we can't break out of that box. We can't really, to use the old AT&T commercial, and it's why AT&T used this motto in that commercial, reach out and touch someone. The idea is, with a telephone, you can connect with people. The reason that was important was because this idea said, you can't really connect. You are all alone, and nobody can reach you. Okay? So, that afternoon, there's another service. It's a funeral service. So he's got 3 services that day. Morning church, afternoon funeral. What's going on in the evening? A wedding. Okay? Busy day. He goes in, preaches his funeral sermon, bends down and looks over the open casket. And people say, that they almost thought that the dead girl smiled at him. Okay? Paragraph 20. One woman says, I had a fancy that the minister and the maiden's spirit were walking hand in hand. So did I. That evening, the handsomest couple in Milford are getting married. And what happens? They're all expecting, surely he's not going to be wearing this black veil. Because that would not only be a sign of disrespect, but it would kind of give bad omens for this wedding. He comes in, they see it. Clouds seem to have rushed duskily from beneath the black crape, dimmed the light of the candles. That is very symbolic. Dimming the light of the candles. It was thought, English custom, and bear in mind these are descendants of the English, that if you have candles lit for a wedding, if a gust blows out those candles, that's a sign that the marriage isn't going to last. Okay? And these candles seem to dim. But the bride's cold fingers quivered in the tremulous hand of the bridegroom. Her death-like paleness caused a whisper that the maiden who was buried a few hours before rose from the dead to get married. Okay? He goes to take a sip of wine. And we're told, let's see, catching a glimpse of his figure in the looking glass, the black veil involved his own spirit in the horror with which it had overwhelmed all others. He goes to take a drink and he sees himself in the mirror. And he sees the black veil, and the narrator tells us he has the same experience everybody else does in seeing him. Drops the glass and runs. Okay? Next day, everybody's talking. Little groups. He comes out to walk around, and people shy away from him. His fiancée comes to him. Okay? And what happens? What does she ask? 1, why are you wearing the veil? Can't answer. What's your next question? She says, I'll marry you, but you got to take it off sometime. No, ain't going to happen. I'll marry you, but you got to let me at least see your face once. No, ain't going to happen. Okay? He says, page 394, in response to her, there is nothing terrible in this piece of crepe, except that it hides a face which I'm always glad to look upon. Come, good sir, let the sun shine from behind the cloud. Notice, she is saying his face is the sun. The veil is the cloud. Let the sun shine. Take the veil off. Lay aside your black veil. Then tell me why you put it on. And he says, in very biblical language, there is an hour to come when all of us shall cast aside our veils. Well, what veils? Allie's not wearing a veil right now. Keely's not wearing a veil. None of you guys are wearing veils. I have had students, I've had Muslim students who wear veils, okay? But he says, all of us are wearing veils. A time will come when all of us shall cast aside our veils. What veil is he talking about? What is the hour? The hour is the hour of our death. The veil? How did Hamlet refer to this mortal coil? Okay? Flesh. Our physical lives. Take it not amiss, beloved friend, if I wear this piece of crepe till then. In other words, I'm going to keep this on until I die. She says, your words are a mystery too. Take away the veil for them. Remove the mystery. He says, I will as far as I can. Here's what you need to know. This veil is a type and a symbol. Those aren't synonyms. They're two different things. A type and a symbol. Okay? And I'm bound to wear it ever, both in light, darkness, solitude before the gaze of multitudes, as with strangers, so with my familiar friends. No mortal eye will see it withdrawn. This dismal, that's another word that means darkened or shadowed, shade must separate me from the world. Even you can never come behind it. Okay? So what is a type? This is a type of phone, right? Yes, it is. This is a type of pen. Has ink in it. It's a dry erase pen, but it's a type of pen. Okay? Type of sunglasses, type of shirt, type of jeans. So what's a type? They point to what? Type of phone points to the phone. The idea of phone. Phone that incorporates, because we probably got 5 different kinds of phones in here. All different kinds of phones. This is Platonic idealism. Plato said there's a world of forms and a world down here of copies of those forms. This is a copy of the real idea of phone, or smartphone if you want. Okay? This is a copy of the real idea of laptop computer. All laptop computers have got to have what? Screen. Do they have to have a keyboard? No, they don't. Because that keyboard can be what? Touch on the screen. They don't have to have actual keys. Okay? So, he says it's a type. He's using that language because that's biblical language. You go back to the Old Testament, and all the heroes of the Old Testament, all the deliverers of the Old Testament, all the saviors of the Old Testament are all types. Why? Because in that language, they point to a fulfillment of them. So, Samson is a type of Christ. That is, he is this is a type of the ideal phone. He is a current embodiment. He is a prefiguring. What do I mean by that? He's a hero, right? If you know the story of Samson. He's a hero. Well, he's Christ. Christ is the quintessential, perfect one of those. Okay? Let me use a better example. Moses. Moses does what for the children of Israel in Egypt?
Freeze them.
He frees them. He's the deliverer. He frees them from what? Delivers them from what? Slavery, bondage. That is a type. How? Okay, so we use Moses Christ, according to traditional Western theology, Christ is what? He's a deliverer from sin. How? Baptism, death, resurrection, bingo, the whole 9 yards. Okay? So you could go through the entire, for example, the entire book of Judges in the Old Testament. And whenever you have one of the judges, they're a type. Why? Christ is the judge. Okay? He is the leader of his followers, etc., etc. So he says, this veil is a type. So then you have to ask yourself, what's it a type of? What is the idea of veil that Hawthorne is getting at? Okay? So, he appeals to her, and what does she essentially say to his appeal? He says, have patience with me, Elizabeth. Do not desert me, top of 395. Though this veil must be between us ever here on earth. She says, lift it but once. What does that really mean? Put that in modern, colloquial language between two lovers. Well, sweetie, if you really love me, you'd have sex with me. That's essentially it. Just once. That's all it takes. Lift it but once. And he says, never. Sayonara. And she walks out of his life. Okay? So, years go by, and what do we see? Does Parson Hooper ever get married again? Or ever get married? Nope. He stays in the same town, and people start to come from far and wide to listen to his sermons, because man, is he a powerful speaker. So he wasn't powerful before, but now he is. Is he speaking differently? Is he raising his voice? Is he calling down? No. Same thing, it's just the veil. So he gets ready to die, page 397. He's on his deathbed. And the minister of Westbury comes in and calls him Venerable Father Hooper. Venerable means old and saint-like, even though the Puritans didn't believe in saints. This is some guy who's almost, worthy of being venerated. Not quite worshipped, but close. He says, you're almost dead. Are you ready for the lifting of the veil that shuts in time from eternity? What's that veil? Death. Okay? When Christ died on the cross, what veil famously was torn?
Between
the veil in the veil in the temple in Jerusalem that separated the Holy of Holies from the outer court. The Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, where the high priest would go in once a year. Okay? And it ripped from top to bottom. And the way early Christian interpreters interpreted that was showing God ripped it. God opened the way back to him. So, you ready for that veil to be torn? Yeah, I saw the patient weariness. Reverend Mr. Clark, okay, you're a holy person. Great prayer, great example. Lift the veil from your face. Before the veil of eternity be lifted, let me cast aside this black veil. And he bends forward to pull it up. And the old guy snatches both of his hands from beneath the bedclothes and presses them strongly and holds that veil down. Never, Dark old man. Well, that's not very praiseworthy. With what horrible crime upon your soul are you now passing to the judgment? And what does old Parson Hooper say? We'll have to wait because we've run out of time. Okay, we'll finish this like in 5 minutes on Friday. So read read Faulkner's Barn Burning for Friday.